The anxious mother thought for a long time. "I wish," she said finally, "for my son to love everyone he meets." "That is the correct wish," said the guru. "It is granted." When the mother found her son again, he was walking through a crowd of people. Most were ignoring him, others shoved him as they passed by. One even took offence at something and spat on him, but his eyes were full of love and his face had a look of total contentment. Ray Avery, there's a face of contentment with you really at this time, but there was a lot of contempt at the start of your world, wasn't there?
Well, my early life was very challenging, and I think I was always looking for love, and it wasn't until I began to do good work in developing countries that I found some sort of redemption and freedom. So it's a sort of parable of the opening part of that book. You know, by loving others, I found my own place in life.
That's right. Tell us about your childhood, because when we think of families, we think of love, but that's not the right word really for your child or your family, was it?
Well, I was brought up in a dysfunctional home. My mother was an alcoholic and my father was a womanizer, and he left home very early, and there was a lot of violence and brutality, and my mother even at one stage tried to sell me to a friend so that she could get some money. So it was a very difficult childhood, and then I was attacked by my mother at one stage and beaten unconscious, so then I was made a ward of court, and I never saw my mother again, but I ended up in actually a worse situation, because then I was in a whole diaspora of halfway houses and borstals, orphanages and so on. It was post-war Britain, and there was 350,000 of us washed around. They were part of the debris of the bombing that had gone on, and also the cases like me, post-war affairs, which really weren't meant to be. But it was also an annealing time that enabled me to gain my own strength, I think.
So where did the street kid, how did he then form to be an influencer, a global influencer in our world now?
Well, you know, in those institutions you get dehumanised. It's almost like being in prison. So, I remember going to one orphanage, and they looked at the name on my case and it said Raymond. They said, "Well, you've already got two Raymonds, so you'll be called Jack." You know, so even those kind of bits of identity were lost. So you had to look inside yourself, and I think that was the beginning of being an ethical scientist, in that I was a great observer of life, because I wasn't actually involved in it. I should watch out the window, and books became a sense of escape. By reading books, I could be transported to a romantic world that I believe existed. It didn't exist for me, but I believe there was a world that was a good world that I could be part of.
Where did you find your first love with science? When did that come into your world?
Well, I think what happened was that all the abuse and the things had turned itself into a sense of self-determination. So I decided to make the world the way I wanted it to be. So, armed with the knowledge that I had in those books, I ran away from the orphanage, for instance, lived under a railway bridge, and I was always a great entrepreneur, so I started getting bicycles in the local tip, repairing them and selling them to my friends, and that was the beginning of my sense of freedom and self-determination. Yeah.
And now, of course, your laboratories now provide 13% of the world market for intraocular lenses.
Well, I became a professional scientist and had a whole lot of unique set of skills to do things, and Fred Hollows approached me to go to Eritrea, North Africa, at the end of the 30-year War of Independence to build the laboratory. Unfortunately, the country was in ruins because of the 30-year war, so it was a very hard job to do, but I promised Fred I'd do it, and we did, and now there are 16 million people walking around with one of the lenses made on the machinery that I designed. And that's a nice thing, you know, but that really just got me started, because I thought, if I can do that, then I can do other big things. So we've got some low-cost infant incubators, nutritional products, and an IV controller which will revolutionise the delivery of drugs in a developing world setting. So that little boy that was under the railway bridge dreamed of owning his own bicycle shop, and now I dream of changing world health.
So
it's a big change.
Yeah. Now, fair to say that you were a bit of a player in your day, weren't you, Ray?
Sorry,
but you were a bit of a player in your day, I think, weren't you, Ray?
Well, I I did a lot of due diligence before I got married. I think that was part of that. I don't think you get out of those orphanages for free. And I needed to think that I was loved. So my thesis was that if I had lots of women loving me, that I would feel redemption. And I gave it a good shot, you know. It was the 60s as well. It was, you know, sex and drugs and rock and roll, and I didn't do much music or drugs. So, I certainly did a lot of due diligence, but it never brought me any great happiness. And so it wasn't until I think I was looking for love from them to replace the love I never had. But in finding myself, I think, then I was able to find the right woman eventually.
Yeah, in 97. And you've written a letter that you wrote to her, and I thought it was just gorgeous. You're talking about when she smiles, that smile and those small creases form around her eyes, and her nose when she laughs, she takes his breath away. She is a terrible beauty. And you've been graced with a child and one on the way.
Yes, I asked my wife when she was 42 if, you know, she thought she might like a child, and she said, well, because then we should try, you know. And with my age and the amount of Chardonnay that I've drunk, I thought it might take several decades. But apparently, the first month we were in the same room together, in the same country, because she has her own charity as well and travels widely. We had conceived our baby, and she's a wonderful 2-year-old, or coming up to 2. And just a few months ago, we found out we were having another child. So, as I was saying before, my plumber thinks that I should have been made New Zealand of the Year just for that feat. But
absolutely.
But I'm very blessed. I found that complete love now. My daughter gives me a hug, for instance. In some way, it washes away the last vestiges of all those bad years. So 2 things give me great joy now: my family, and seeing people, particularly when they have their sight restored and the bandages come off, they look like they've seen God for the first time, because their eyes light up, and then I know I've done a good day's work. Yeah.
Okay, hey, thank you, Ray. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and make sure you do buy our Ray's book. It's a great present for Farmers Day, isn't it?